Chapter 1. The Hidden World. Dr. Laina Mercer adjusted the settings on her quantum microscope, staring at the microscopic image unfolding before her. Her hands trembled slightly, a rarity for the seasoned scientist. A slight pulse of adrenaline coursed through her veins as the tiny figures on the screen came into focus. At first, it had been just a grain of dust, trapped in the cracks of a small ancient meteorite that had been sitting in her lab for weeks. She'd only planned to run some basic tests to analyze the mineral composition, but the results were anything but ordinary. The usual minerals were there, iron, nickel, and traces of rare earth elements, but there was something else. Something alive. The nanoscope flickered, its quantum sensors processing information too fast for the human eye to track. Laina zoomed in further, her focus narrowing as the image sharpened. What she saw made her heart skip a beat. There, in the space between atoms, was a bustling, structured world. Small figures, no taller than the width of a hair, moved with purpose across a grid-like landscape. Buildings that seemed to pulse with a faint light, built from what appeared to be particles themselves, towered over them. It looked like a city, no, a civilization thriving on a molecular level. She leaned in closer, her breath caught in her throat. Impossible, she whispered to herself. The figures moved with uncanny precision, their tiny forms darting through streets that weren't visible to the naked eye, manipulating atoms and particles in ways that defied conventional understanding. Their movements seemed to cause ripples in the surrounding space, tiny waves that spread like shock waves through the molecular network. Laina's mind raced. What are they? For a long moment, she simply stared at the tiny city, a creeping awe growing within her. This was beyond anything she had ever expected to encounter in her career. Her hand hovered over the keyboard, ready to take notes, but something in the back of her mind stopped her. It wasn't just an interesting anomaly. It was something alive. Intelligent. A noise from the other side of the lab jolted her from her thoughts. She turned to see her colleague, Dr. Leo Fitzgerald, standing in the doorway, his usual easy smile replaced by a look of concern. Laina? Leo's voice was soft, cautious. You've been in here for hours. Are you okay? Laina blinked, disoriented. She hadn't even noticed how much time had passed. I think I've found something. She motioned to the microscope, her voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. I think there are aliens living inside this meteorite. Leo raised an eyebrow. Aliens? Are we talking about bacteria? Microorganisms? No, Laina's voice was firm now, her confidence returning. These aren't bacteria. These are beings. Intelligent beings. I think they've been here for a very long time. Leo stepped closer, squinting at the screen. His eyes widened as he saw the moving figures. They looked almost like humans, but too small, too intricately woven into the fabric of the atom to be anything remotely familiar. I'll have to run some tests, Laina said, already reaching for a new set of sensors. If this is what I think it is, we might be dealing with a completely new form of life, and not just any life, advanced life. Leo looked at her, his face a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. So what's the plan then? Call NASA? Tell the world? Laina paused. Her eyes remained locked on the screen, tracing the movements of the tiny figures. She had no idea what to do next. She wasn't sure if this was the greatest discovery of all time or a colossal mistake. We need to learn everything we can about them. Before anyone else does. Her voice was firm, her gaze intense. But as she spoke, the faintest glitch appeared in the readings from her instruments. A ripple ran across the data, like a flicker in an otherwise smooth transmission. Laina frowned. That's odd. There's a disturbance in the data. She checked the diagnostics, but everything seemed to be running perfectly fine. Another flicker. This time the screen went completely black. What the hell? Leo exclaimed. Laina hit the reset button, but nothing happened. The quantum sensors seemed to be failing. She tried reboots, checked the cables, and ran a diagnostic scan, but it was no use. The system was glitching as though something was interfering with it from within. And then, on the screen, something moved. A small, flickering dot. No, not a dot. Something far smaller. A ripple. Laina's breath caught in her chest as the dot slowly shifted into the shape of a tiny figure, its movements too quick and too precise to be random. It was staring right back at her. Leo, now visibly concerned, looked over her shoulder. What is that? Laina didn't respond. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. The figure on the screen moved again, this time closer, as though it was peering through the lens at her. A chill ran down her spine. I think they can see us, Laina whispered, her voice shaking. For a moment there was silence. Then, in the blink of an eye, the figure on the screen disappeared. The image of the city vanished, replaced by static. Laina's heart raced. Her hands hovered over the controls, but she didn't know what to do next. The tiny alien beings were watching, and somehow they were already aware of her presence. As the lab lights flickered once more, Laina's mind raced with terrifying possibilities. She had found them. But had she also just awoken something she couldn't control? Get the backup systems running, Laina said, her voice hard and determined. We need to track this down before it gets any worse. Leo didn't hesitate. He rushed to start the backup protocols. But Laina wasn't looking at him anymore. She was staring at the empty screen, waiting for the next move. And she could feel it in her bones. The invasion had already begun. Chapter 2, The Ripple Effect. Laina sat at her desk, her fingers drumming nervously on the edge of the console. The lab was unnervingly quiet, the hum of machines and the occasional beep of equipment the only sounds that filled the space. But it wasn't enough to calm her racing thoughts. She kept replaying the moment in her mind, the tiny figure on the screen staring back at her. She had never felt anything like it before. As though she hadn't just discovered a new form of life, but something far more profound. Something that, for better or worse, had already discovered her. Leo's voice broke through the silence. We've got the backup systems online, but the diagnostics aren't looking good. It's like the system itself is being suppressed. Laina looked up, seeing the frustration on his face. He was sitting in front of the secondary console, his hands flying across the keyboard as he tried to analyze the glitch. She was used to his calm demeanor, but right now, even he seemed rattled. Suppressed? What do you mean? She asked, pushing away from her desk to join him. I mean the data's there, but it's being blocked from coming through properly. Like something is actively preventing us from viewing it? Laina's stomach sank. The tiny beings, they weren't just manipulating atoms and particles. They were manipulating the very technology she relied on to study them. It was as if they knew exactly how to hide themselves. Or worse, they didn't want to be found. We're dealing with something far beyond anything I've ever imagined, she muttered to herself. I need to think. She paced in front of the main lab window, looking out at the distant skyline of the city beyond, her mind trying to make sense of the situation. What was their intention? Were they trying to protect themselves, or were they preparing something much worse? Before she could delve further into her thoughts, her phone buzzed on the desk. It was an encrypted message from an unknown source. Laina, Leo said, his voice tight with suspicion. You didn't? I didn't, she interrupted, picking up the phone with a sense of dread creeping up her spine. The message was simple. We are watching you. Her hands clenched around the phone, the sudden coldness of the words sending a shiver down her back. She wasn't sure if it was the aliens communicating or someone else. Someone who knew what she had found and had been watching for far longer than she'd realized. Leo's voice was more urgent now. This is getting out of hand. We need to go public with this. Tell someone at the highest levels. We need help. Laina's thoughts raced. She could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on her. She had already crossed a line. Revealing the discovery would open up a floodgate of attention, and once the world knew, there would be no going back. The aliens weren't just living in the cracks between atoms. They were living inside every part of her work, their influence seeping through the very fabric of her technology. They could manipulate data, systems, even the flow of information itself. They could control how the entire world viewed them, and humanity. Her instincts screamed at her to be cautious, to remain hidden. But there was a part of her that couldn't ignore the possibility of reaching out to someone who could help. She had to learn more. She had to understand what they wanted. I'm not sure it's safe to go public just yet, Laina said, her voice wavering slightly despite her best efforts to remain composed. We need more data. If we go to the wrong people, they might use this as a weapon, or worse, they might see us as a threat. We need to be careful. Leo nodded reluctantly, though his face showed clear frustration. I get it. But we can't keep this quiet forever, Laina. Someone's going to notice. And what happens then? The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she glanced at the now dark monitor. The static was gone, but she could feel an odd sense of foreboding settling into her bones. What if they were already watching? What if they could hear their conversations, track their every move? Laina rubbed her temples, trying to calm herself. We need to get ahead of this. We'll gather as much data as we can, then make our decision. But we're going to do it quietly. For now. She looked up at Leo, her eyes hardening with determination. Do whatever it takes to get the backup system stable. We're going to keep monitoring them. Leo hesitated before nodding. Okay. But we need to be prepared for anything. Laina returned to her desk, her mind spinning with 1,000 possible outcomes. What if they were already far more integrated into human society than she realized? What if the glitches, the distortions, were just the beginning? Hours passed in a blur of tests and recalibrations. They isolated the interference, but every time they thought they had a breakthrough, the aliens, whatever they were, seemed to adapt to counteract their efforts. Just when she thought they might make some progress, Leo's voice came through, shaky with urgency. "Laina, you need to see this." She rushed over to his console, heart pounding. The screen was filled with data, but it wasn't just the usual information. There was something new, something far more alarming. A string of symbols appeared across the display, repeating over and over again, a message in a language that had no recognizable pattern. "I think they're trying to communicate," Leo said, his voice filled with awe. "But this doesn't look like anything we've seen before. It's not just random noise." Laina stared at the screen, her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't an error. The aliens were sending them a message. And now the real challenge began. Because whatever they had to say, it wasn't going to be something she could ignore. Chapter 3. The Language of the Unseen. Laina felt the weight of the moment press down on her chest as she stared at the string of symbols flashing across the screen. Her mind scrambled to make sense of the alien language that seemed to pulse with an eerie rhythm, like a heartbeat coming from the other side of reality. What are they saying? Leo's voice trembled with a mix of wonder and fear. He wasn't speaking as a scientist anymore. He was speaking as a person on the edge of discovering something far larger than either of them had bargained for. Laina shook her head, unable to answer. Her heart pounded in her ears as the symbols danced across the screen. Each one seemed to be interconnected with the others, a fluid, unbreakable chain. The patterns were too complex to decipher without a key, but there was no mistaking the fact that these symbols were intentional, purposeful. For a long moment, Laina and Leo simply watched in stunned silence, as though waiting for the symbols to reveal something more. Then, as if in response to their stares, the symbols paused. The screen flickered. A new symbol appeared, one unlike the rest. This one was glowing, shimmering with an iridescent light. It was as if the alien message had entered a new phase, one that would finally break through the barrier between them and whatever these creatures wanted. Laina's breath caught as the symbol morphed into a phrase, written in a simple yet startlingly clear pattern of lights. "We are the echo. You are the pulse." The words didn't just appear on the screen, they seemed to resonate, vibrating in the air around them, like the hum of an ancient machine. Laina could feel them deep in her bones, as if the message was being transmitted directly into her very being. "What does it mean?" Leo asked, his voice barely a whisper. Laina was silent for a moment, trying to process the strange sensation that the words had left in her mind. Echo, pulse. They felt like metaphors, perhaps representing the relationship between the aliens and humanity. Were the Micronauts seeing humans as the driving force, the energy that propelled them forward? Or were they simply stating that humanity's presence was a reaction to something larger, something they had set in motion long before? "I don't know yet," Laina murmured, her voice distant as she leaned forward, trying to decipher the message further. "But it feels like a warning. Or a challenge." The symbols continued to shift across the screen, and Laina could feel a strange pressure building in the room, as if the walls themselves were listening, waiting for her to respond. She scanned the data, her fingers brushing over the keys as she ran an algorithm designed to break down the pattern. "It's not just a language," she muttered. "It's a code. A code that interacts with reality itself. The way the symbols glow and pulse, it's almost like they're tapping into the same quantum fields we've been trying to manipulate with our tech. These aliens aren't just sending information, they're manipulating the space around them." Leo frowned. "So, they're using our technology against us? Or are they just that much more advanced?" Laina didn't answer right away. She was too focused on the shifting pattern, the way the symbols seemed to breathe, to flicker in time with the quantum fluctuations around them. Then, something unexpected happened. The message on the screen changed again, but this time the words were not just symbols, they were sounds. A soft hum, barely perceptible at first, began to resonate from the speakers. It was a tone, a frequency that seemed to warp the air around them. The hum grew louder, more defined. Laina's eyes widened as she realized what it was. The Micronauts weren't just sending written symbols, they were transmitting sound, a frequency embedded in their communication. A series of pulses echoed through the lab, synchronized with the patterns on the screen. Laina felt her skin prickle, her senses heightening as if she was tuning into a wavelength she didn't even know existed. The symbols changed once again, but now, alongside them were words, clear, familiar words translated into English. "Your world is a reflection of ours. We were once giants too. Now we are small, diminished by our own excess. We seek a future. Yours is a choice. Will you shrink with us? Laina's heart skipped a beat. The words hit her like a physical blow. Will you shrink with us? The message was a terrifying echo of what she had feared. The Micronauts had once been giants, she realized. They had lived as a full-sized civilization just like humanity. But something had caused their downfall: war, overconsumption, or perhaps an unforeseen collapse. And now, they were reduced to a microscopic existence, their very survival depending on their ability to live in the cracks between atoms. The implications were staggering. Were the Micronauts trying to warn humanity? Were they asking for help? Or were they preparing to force humanity into the same fate? Leo was staring at the screen, his expression pale. This isn't just a message, it's a test, Laina. They're testing us. They want to see how we'll respond. But what if we don't shrink? What if we don't take their offer? Laina's mind raced, her thoughts colliding in a whirlwind of fear and curiosity. She wasn't sure whether to be terrified or fascinated by the Micronauts' request. She had always assumed that discovering an alien civilization would be the pinnacle of her career, a moment that would unite the world in wonder. But now, it felt like humanity was teetering on the edge of an abyss, a terrifying decision that could change the course of their future. There has to be another way, Laina said softly, more to herself than to Leo. There has to be a way to survive without repeating their mistakes. The hum from the speakers intensified, as though the Micronauts were pushing the message into their minds. The symbols seemed to pulsate on the screen, urging Laina and Leo to consider their options, to understand the gravity of their situation. Suddenly the screen went black. Laina's breath caught in her throat, her pulse quickening. Had they done it? Had the aliens cut off their communication? Or was it something else entirely? For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then a single line of text flickered across the screen, one last message as clear as day. We will be watching. Laina's heart froze. The connection had been severed, but the warning was undeniable. The Micronauts were not just watching. They were waiting. And whatever decision humanity made, it would be their last. Chapter 4. The Turning Point. The lab felt colder now, as if the air itself had thickened, drawn taut with an unseen pressure. The silence after the final message was overwhelming, as if the entire world had held its breath in the wake of the Micronauts' declaration. Laina sat motionless, staring at the dark screen, her mind spinning in a vortex of possibilities. We've crossed a line, haven't we? Leo's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, his face pale under the harsh lab lights. His usual composure was gone, replaced with the uncertainty that had taken root in both of them since that first moment of discovery. Laina didn't respond immediately. She was still trying to process everything. The warning, the offer, the chilling final message. We will be watching. It was like a promise or perhaps a threat. Either way, it didn't feel like an idle one. The truth was, she had no idea what to do now. Part of her wanted to shut it all down, to walk away from the research, to let the whole thing fade into the ether. The other part, the scientist in her, burned with curiosity, a need to understand these beings and their message. But at what cost? I don't know what to think anymore, Laina murmured, pressing her fingers to her temples. We're not prepared for this. We don't even know who or what we're dealing with. Leo stood up and walked to the lab's small kitchenette, rubbing his eyes. You said yourself, Laina, they were once like us. They had the same potential. Maybe we're headed down the same road they did. Laina's head snapped up at his words. What are you saying? That we should shrink ourselves? Give up everything humanity stands for just to survive? Leo turned, looking at her with a hard expression. No. But maybe they're trying to tell us something. Maybe we're on the edge of destroying ourselves just like they did. We're running out of time. We're over-consuming, polluting, fighting wars that we can't win. What if this is our last chance? Maybe we should listen. Laina shook her head. No. We can't give up. There's always another way. We can't let them control us, even if they're trying to save us. We have to fight for our future, Leo. For all the things that make us human. Leo was quiet for a moment, his gaze never leaving hers. Finally, he spoke again, voice low and tinged with uncertainty. I don't know if we have much of a choice anymore. The room grew heavy, the weight of his words settling in. Laina stood up abruptly, walking to the microscope, trying to distract herself from the oppressive silence. She needed to focus, to find something that could help. We need more data, she said, her voice firm. We need to understand them better. We can't make a decision based on a few cryptic messages. We need to find out what they really want. Leo sighed, his eyes downcast. I agree, but we're running out of time. What if they're already taking action? What if they've been manipulating us all along, pushing us toward this point? Laina didn't answer. Instead, she began working furiously, typing commands into the console. The screen flickered to life again and she reopened the files from the previous days. The microscopic images, the energy signatures, everything they had collected on the Micronauts. She needed something, anything, that could give her an edge. As she examined the data, something caught her eye. A pattern, subtle but unmistakable. The energy fluctuations. They were consistent, too consistent. Almost like a heartbeat. She zoomed in, adjusting the parameters of the scan to get a closer look. Her breath hitched as she realized what it was. The Micronauts had been influencing more than just the data. They had been manipulating the very quantum fields around them, generating ripples that aligned with human technology, guiding it in a certain direction. Leo, Laina said urgently, I think we're not just dealing with a passive force here. They've been manipulating our technology, our research, for years. Leo looked over her shoulder, his expression shifting from confusion to realization. What do you mean? I'm saying they've been influencing us from the start. We've been investigating them, but they've been watching us, guiding us to this point. Maybe even encouraging us to keep going, to dig deeper. It's like they want us to find them. Her heart pounded as she thought about the implications. The Micronauts weren't just hiding in the cracks of a meteorite, they were embedded in the very systems they had created. They were in the code of humanity's future, pulling invisible strings. But why? What do they want from us? Leo took a step back. Maybe they're trying to teach us. Maybe they want us to understand the cost of overconsumption, of the path we're heading down. Maybe they think this is the only way we'll change. Laina shook her head. It's more than that. They're not just trying to warn us, they're making us an offer. Shrink or face extinction. There was a long silence. Neither of them spoke for a moment, the weight of their conversation hanging heavily between them. Finally, Leo spoke, his voice softer now. What if they're right? What if this is the only way we can survive? Laina turned, meeting his gaze. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Uncertainty, yes, but also fear. And maybe something else, a glimpse of hope. You're not saying we should just give in to them? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Leo's eyes flickered down to the floor. I'm saying we don't have all the answers, Laina. I'm saying that maybe we need to consider the possibility that they're trying to help us. That maybe we've reached the point where our only choice is to change. To shrink like they did. Laina's pulse quickened, a mixture of anger and fear surging through her. No, we can't just give up. We can't let them decide our fate. If we do that, we'll lose everything that makes us who we are. Leo looked at her, his expression unreadable. And what if we don't change? What if we keep going the way we are? What's left for us then? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Laina found herself unable to answer. She didn't want to believe that humanity had already lost its chance for redemption. She couldn't accept the idea that there was no way out. But deep down, a gnawing fear began to take root. What if Leo was right? What if they really were at the edge of something they couldn't control? Before she could respond, the lights in the lab flickered once again and the screens went dark. Laina's breath caught in her throat. This time it wasn't a glitch. It wasn't just a technical malfunction. The Micronauts were making their move. Chapter 5, The Final Choice. The lab was eerily quiet now. The lights flickered again, casting strange shadows across the walls. Laina's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't dare look away from the darkened screen. She could feel it, the tension that had been building for days now, creeping up her spine, settling deep in her bones. The Micronauts were no longer just watching. They were preparing to act. Laina, Leo's voice was hoarse, his tone edged with something like panic. What's happening? Laina swallowed, her throat dry. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she couldn't bring herself to type anything. The system was frozen. The quantum sensors had gone offline completely, and the screens were blank, devoid of any data. It felt like an invisible hand was squeezing the air out of the room, pressing down, suffocating them. Then the speakers crackled to life, a faint hum vibrating through the air, low and constant. At first it was only a murmur, a vibration just beyond comprehension. But as it grew louder, it became unmistakable. Words. You have been given the choice. You will be shown the way or you will be forgotten. Laina's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a message, it was a declaration, a final offer. The Micronauts were tired of waiting. She felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. Would humanity shrink with them or would they resist and face extinction? Was there truly any choice left? Leo, Laina whispered, her voice shaking. I don't know if we can stop them. Leo's gaze was fixed on the screen, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. I don't think we can either. Whatever they are doing, it's already started. Suddenly the lights flickered once more and the screen came to life, only this time it was different. The image that appeared was not from their lab, not even from Earth. It was a city, or rather what had once been a city. The buildings, towering structures of gleaming metal and glass, were now crumbling, reduced to rubble. The streets were empty, devoid of life. The air was thick with dust, the sky a dull red. It was an image of desolation, a civilization on the brink of collapse. This is what will be. You are following the same path we did. The words echoed in the lab, amplified, vibrating through every surface. Laina's chest tightened, her mind racing. It was a warning, one that the Micronauts had lived through. A warning they had already paid for with their own existence. The image on the screen was a vision of their lost homeworld, now nothing but a decaying husk, its inhabitants reduced to shadows of their former selves. They had shrunk to survive, but at what cost? Their civilization, their identity, their very essence had been lost in the process. What if we don't shrink? Laina whispered, more to herself than to Leo. What happens then? The speakers hummed again, the words cold and final. You will be erased? Laina recoiled as though she had been slapped. Her mind spun, the weight of their message sinking in. The Micronauts weren't just offering a way out, they were threatening annihilation. If humanity refused to take the path they had laid out, if humanity refused to shrink, they would be wiped from existence. Gone. The world felt like it was collapsing in on her. She had always believed that humanity could overcome anything, that there was always a solution, a way to fight back. But now, faced with the truth, Laina wasn't sure anymore. Leo, she said quietly, her voice cracking. What do we do? Leo was silent for a moment, his eyes locked on the screen. Then he spoke, his voice steady but filled with sorrow. I don't think we have a choice, Laina. Not anymore. Laina shook her head, desperate for a solution, for something that could save them. But deep down, a part of her knew he was right. The Micronauts had given them a choice, but it was one they couldn't escape. They were trapped between extinction and submission. She closed her eyes, the weight of it all pressing down on her. She thought of the world, of Earth, of everything that had made them human. She thought of the progress, the mistakes, the wars, and the hope. Could they really shrink themselves down, become something smaller, something less than what they were? Would they lose themselves in the process like the Micronauts had? Would humanity survive only to fade into irrelevance? A shiver ran down her spine. She didn't want to lose them, her people, her home, her planet. But the alternative was unthinkable. Finally, Laina turned to Leo. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her voice was resolute. We'll shrink, she said, her words heavy with sorrow. We'll shrink, but we won't let them erase us. We will rebuild, we will learn from their mistakes, and we will survive. We'll find a way. Leo nodded slowly, his expression resigned but not without a trace of hope. If we can hold on to who we are, even in that form, maybe it's worth it. Maybe there's still a future. Laina took a deep breath, looking back at the screen as the Micronauts' message faded, their offer still hanging in the air like a guillotine. She knew what they had to do. They would shrink. But they would do it on their own terms. The choice had been made. As the lab lights dimmed and the hum from the speakers faded into silence, Laina felt an odd sense of peace settle over her. The Micronauts had given them a path, but they hadn't stolen their will. Humanity wasn't just a reflection of their past mistakes, it was something more. They could still find a way forward even in the smallest of forms. But as the door to their fate opened, Laina couldn't shake the feeling that the real test was only just beginning. The Micronauts had shown them the way. Now, it was up to humanity to decide how they would walk it. And Laina knew that no matter how small they became, they would never lose the pulse of what made them human. The end.